October of 1888 was a month that settled over the high desert with the biting clarity of a premonition. The air, crisp and thin, carried the scent of drying sage and the distant metallic tang of an approaching winter. On the 14th day of that month, a scene unfolded in the dusty square of Prospect's End, a settlement clinging to the foothills of the Blackwood Range that would be remembered by some as a triumph of order, and by others as an act of profound injustice. The sun, a pale, indifferent orb in the vast sky, cast long shadows as a small crowd, perhaps 15 or 20 souls, gathered for a public confiscation. Among them, prominent in his starched shirt and polished boots, stood the sheriff, a man whose bearing radiated an unsettling blend of self-importance and thinly veiled menace. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, yet it carried clearly across the square, declaring the formal seizure of assets belonging to Ilara Vance. Ilara, a woman of 26 years, stood on the periphery, her gaze fixed on the 6 magnificent horses now tethered near the sheriff's temporary platform. They were her lifeline, her legacy, the very essence of her existence in this harsh territory. Her hands, already showing the early signs of hard labor despite her youth, were clenched at her sides. Beside her, a scruffy, grey-furred dog with startling amber eyes, named Flint, remained perfectly still, a silent sentinel, his unwavering attention fixed on Ilara. He had been a starving pup, abandoned by a retreating mining camp 2 years prior, discovered by Ilara near a bubbling stream where she and her father were collecting medicinal herbs. She had nursed him back to health, and he had been her shadow ever since, a quiet, observant companion whose loyalty was absolute. The sheriff announced that the horses were being confiscated due to an alleged oversight in land taxes, a technicality he had meticulously unearthed following the death of Ilara's husband 2 years prior. Her husband, a quiet man who had shared her love for the expansive, untamed land, had passed suddenly from a fever, leaving Ilara vulnerable and exposed. Her father, a surveyor of considerable skill and foresight, had died just a year before that, succumbing to a rockslide while mapping a remote pass. His passing had removed the last layer of protection for Ilara, leaving her isolated in a community where a woman's independent claim to land and livelihood was often viewed with suspicion, if not outright hostility. The sheriff, an opportunist of the first order, had moved swiftly, using convoluted legal pretexts to undermine her inheritance. The horses, muscular and well cared for, nickered softly, sensing the disruption in their routine. They were not merely animals. They were an extension of her ability to navigate the rugged terrain, to transport goods, to maintain the semblance of a viable enterprise. Now, under the indifferent gaze of the gathered onlookers, they were paraded one by one before the makeshift auctioneer. The bids, though cautious, represented a steady erosion of her future. Ilara watched, a knot of cold fury tightening in her stomach, but she said nothing. Her father had taught her that anger uncontrolled was a tool for fools. He had always told her, even when faced with the most daunting terrain, that the mountains do not hide the way. They simply demand you learn to see it. This philosophy, a quiet insistence on observation and understanding over brute force, had been ingrained in her since childhood. After the last horse was sold, the sheriff, feeling magnanimous in his victory, began to auction off a few remaining, seemingly worthless parcels of land that Ilara still technically owned, deemed unsellable and liabilities by the county. Among these was a particularly desolate stretch of high, rocky ground, known locally as the Barren's Tooth. It was a jagged, wind-swept ridge, perpetually shadowed and reputedly cursed, avoided by all save the hardiest of mountain goats. The auctioneer, a portly man whose voice had grown hoarse, announced the lot with a dismissive wave of his hand, half expecting no bids. To the collective amusement and several outright guffaws from the onlookers, Ilara, stepping forward from the crowd, placed the winning bid of a single silver dollar, a sum so paltry it barely registered. The sheriff, his clean-shaven face momentarily betraying surprise, quickly recovered, offering a patronizing smile. He had effectively stripped her of everything valuable. This last, seemingly foolish acquisition was merely proof of her obstinacy. A few men openly chuckled, exchanging knowing glances about the young widow's stubborn and pointless gesture. One man, Mr. Henderson, a local merchant, even clapped her on the back, remarking loudly that she had certainly secured herself a fine piece of nothing. Ilara merely took the freshly stamped deed from the clerk, its official seal cold against her fingertips. Her plain, practical dress was dusted with the day's grime, her hands bearing the marks of a life spent in physical labor, a stark contrast to the sheriff's pristine attire. She turned, her back to the dispersing crowd, and walked away from the square. Flint trotted faithfully at her side, his amber eyes occasionally glancing up at her face. The new deed, crinkling softly in her pocket, represented not what the place had been, nor what others perceived it to be, but what it would need next, a silent promise to the unforgiving landscape. The first frost of November had already dusted the peaks when Ilara Vance began her initial inspection of the Barren's tooth. The land stretched before her, an unforgiving expanse of jagged rock and sparse, tenacious scrub, rising sharply from the valley floor. To the casual eye, or indeed to the dozens of prospectors and land surveyors who had long dismissed it, it was an utterly useless parcel. The terrain was a chaotic jumble of ancient granite outcroppings, fractured shale, and steep, perilous scree slopes. It was exposed to the full force of the north winds, and its precarious geology made it prone to rock slides, especially during the spring thaws. Local legends whispered of a miner who had attempted to forge a path through it only to be buried alive by a sudden collapse, a tale that solidified its reputation as an impassable death trap. This, then, was why it had been abandoned, why no one had ever dared to claim it for productive use. Its very nature screamed futility. But Ilara saw something different. Her father, a surveyor who believed the land always spoke its truth, had instilled in her an acute observational sensibility, a patience that allowed her to discern patterns hidden from hurried glances. She saw not merely chaos, but a complex, three-dimensional puzzle. She observed the subtle striations in the rock, the way certain ancient fault lines, though appearing unstable, actually created natural, reinforced passages. She noted the runoff channels, how water in its relentless journey had carved paths of least resistance that with careful modification could become pathways of engineered purpose. Her father's worn, leather-bound journal, a treasure trove of his lifetime's accumulated knowledge, was her constant companion. It was filled with meticulous maps, astronomical observations, and detailed notes on the geological formations unique to this region. Her first measurements were slow, painstaking. She used her father's brass compass and surveying chain, meticulously recording every angle, every elevation. She noted that the average slope of the eastern face was 42 degrees, making direct ascent impossible for laden animals, but certain switchbacks, hidden within ancient erosion patterns, presented a more manageable 21 degrees. The predominant rock, a form of metamorphic schist, exhibited a compressive strength of approximately 25,000 pounds per square inch in its undisturbed state, far more stable than the loose scree it often resembled. Consulting her father's journal, Ilara found a series of entries detailing a method for identifying stable rock formations through the observation of specific lichen growth and the subtle hum of thermal vents. a secret known only to those who spent decades intimately acquainted with the mountain's breath. Her father had once written, in elegant, sloping script, that the mountains do not hide the way, they simply demand you learn to see it. This principle, he had explained, meant looking beyond the immediate obstacles to understand the underlying structure, to find the inherent logic in the apparent disorder. He had detailed how the very forces that shaped the land could be harnessed, how a knowledge of water's flow and rock's fracture lines could turn impassable terrain into a navigable route. She recorded her first key measurement on November 1st, 1888. Altitude of the proposed southern ascent, 3,400 feet, with a potential natural ledge at 3,580 feet, suitable for initial terracing. Word of Ilara's solitary endeavors quickly reached Prospect's End, fueling the initial amusement with a fresh wave of skepticism. Mr. Henderson, the merchant who had so gleefully witnessed her final purchase, often spoke dismissively. He said that no sane person would try to cross that ridge, let alone build anything there, suggesting that Ilara was merely wasting her last meager resources on a fool's errand. Old man Fitzwilliam, a retired prospector whose face was a roadmap of sun and wind, had a more colourful yet equally damning assessment. He declared that the ground was too unstable, good only for rattlesnakes and stubborn mules, and that Ilara would soon learn the hard way that mountains yielded to no human will. Even Justice Crowley, a stern circuit judge with a reputation for uncompromising practicality, expressed his profound doubt. He had heard Ilara's plans, relayed through gossiping townsfolk, and expressed his firm belief that she was simply delaying the inevitable forfeiture of her last remaining assets, a foolish act of defiance rather than sound judgment. Each dismissal, however, only solidified Ilara's resolve. The mountain, after all, was hers to read, hers to understand, hers to traverse. This story of Ilara's ingenuity in the face of impossible odds is a testament to the quiet power of human will and the enduring spirit of survival. It reminds us that often the greatest resources are not those easily seen, but those meticulously uncovered. Subscribe to the channel before we continue. In the next section, we'll see how Ilara's father's survey journal, packed with obscure but vital geological insights, helps her transform an impassable ridge into a functional route. What happens when the unforgiving winter descends and her carefully constructed path faces its ultimate test? What is the most unconventional tool or piece of knowledge you've ever used to overcome a seemingly impossible challenge? Share your stories in the comments below. The following months blurred into a relentless cycle of physical exertion and meticulous planning. From late 1888 through the spring and summer of 1889, Ilara Vance dedicated herself to the unforgiving task of forging her trail. Her body became a testament to the work. Her hands, initially just calloused, began to split and bleed from the constant contact with rock and rough tools, then healed, forming thick, resilient pads, only to crack again in the dry, cold air. Her shoulders, initially strong, began to ache with a dull, persistent throb. Her lower back ached from the endless stooping and lifting, and her knees, subjected to countless ascents and descents over uneven terrain, developed a stiffness that only loosened after a full hour of morning stretches. Exhaustion was not an intermittent visitor, but a constant heavy companion, a weight that settled into her bones by dusk each day, demanding sleep as profound as it was brief. The temperature was a relentless arbiter of her daily existence. In the early winter months, the air often plunged to 35 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, forcing her to work in layers of thick wool and animal hides, her breath freezing in white plumes. The spring brought driving rains and mud that clung to her boots like lead weights, and the summer months of July and August scorched the exposed rock to temperatures exceeding 90 degrees, baking the very air she breathed. Her tools were simple but essential: a heavy steel pickaxe for breaking stubborn shale, a broad-bladed shovel for clearing loose earth and scree, a long crowbar for prying larger stones, and, judiciously, small charges of blasting powder, used with an engineer's precision to remove truly impassable sections without destabilizing the surrounding rock. She also relied on her father's surveyor's chain, his level, and a meticulously maintained compass, using them to ensure every gradient, every turn, was perfectly calibrated. The construction process was a grueling 5-stage endeavor. First, she meticulously mapped the most stable rock faces and identified natural drainage lines, always mindful of where water would flow during thaws and heavy rains, using her father's journal to predict rock strata. Second, she began the arduous work of clearing loose scree and minor rockfalls, using the shovel and crowbar to dislodge tons of unstable material, creating a more solid base. Third, she reinforced natural shelters found within the rock formations, transforming shallow caves and overhangs into rudimentary way stations, shoring them with timbers and dry stone walls against the elements. Fourth, with pickaxe and hammer, she painstakingly carved strategic footholds and widened ledges, transforming narrow goat paths into passages wide enough for a laden pack animal. Each chisel strike was informed by an understanding of the rock's natural fracture planes, gleaned from her father's extensive notes on geological stress points. Finally, she erected cairns and subtle markers, not ostentatious monuments, but carefully placed stacks of stones designed to be almost invisible to the uninitiated eye, yet distinct guides for her system. These markers often incorporated specific rock types or orientations mentioned in her father's journal, almost like a secret language of the land. Ilara maintained a rigorous system of monitoring. Each day she meticulously tracked local weather patterns, recorded observations on rock stability following any significant temperature shifts, and noted changes in water runoff. Her journal, now bearing her own scrawled entries alongside her father's elegant script, became a daily log of atmospheric pressure, wind direction, and the nuanced behavior of the mountain. She documented how a sudden drop in barometric pressure often preceded a destabilizing gust of wind, or how a slight tremor in the distant peaks could indicate a nascent rock fracture. The constant low hum of gossip from Prospect's End reached her ears, carried by the infrequent travelers who dared to venture near her lonely ridge. She heard the jokes, delivered with a mix of pity and scorn, about Ilara's folly and the widow Vance's impossible dream. Bets were openly placed in the saloon regarding the exact month her endeavors would collapse, either financially or literally. Old man Fitzwilliam, when he saw her descending for supplies, often bellowed to her, asking if she had found any gold in her pile of rubble, his words laced with derision. She heard them, but her response was always the same: silent, relentless work. She poured every ounce of her energy into the mountain, letting the sheer physicality of the labor drown out the derision. Her first tangible success arrived on May 12th, 1889, a crisp morning when the last remnants of winter snow still clung to the highest crevices. She had, after weeks of backbreaking work, completed a crucial section of trail. It was a carefully engineered switchback, ascending a previously sheer face, designed to distribute the weight of passage evenly. She borrowed a stubborn, sure-footed pack mule from a neighboring rancher, loaded it with a heavy 50-pound sack of feed, and personally guided it through the newly carved path. The sound it produced was a rhythmic, satisfying crunch of hooves on solid, stable earth, a stark contrast to the clatter of loose rock. It was a sound of engineering triumph over brute nature. Ilara felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. She did not cheer, did not pause to celebrate. Instead, her sharp engineer's eye immediately noted a slight tremor in a newly cut drainage channel. She spent the next 2 hours adjusting the pitch, ensuring optimal water diversion, confirming her system was not merely functional, but robust. The autumn of 1889 arrived with a harsh, unforgiving temperament, far earlier and more severe than anyone in Prospect's End had anticipated. By late October, the sky had turned a leaden grey, and a biting wind heralded the arrival of a truly catastrophic event. An extreme blizzard. The temperature plunged rapidly, dropping to an unimaginable 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, turning the air itself into a weapon. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in thick, blinding sheets, driven by gale-force winds that howled down from the Blackwood Range. Within 24 hours, the familiar landscape vanished beneath a pristine, deadly white blanket, and the mountain passes, usually treacherous but passable, became utterly impassable. The sheriff's well-maintained roads, which connected Prospect's End to the larger towns, were buried under 15 feet of snow, effectively isolating the settlement. Ilara's trail, Vance's Passage, became the blizzard's primary target. The relentless winds battered her carefully constructed ledges and reinforced sections, piling drifts that threatened to overwhelm her drainage systems. She found herself defending her creation alone, fighting not just the elements, but the sheer crushing weight of the snow. Flint, ever her loyal companion, hunkered close, his grey fur bristling against the icy wind, occasionally letting out a low, protective growl, as if challenging the storm itself. He kept close to her feet, his amber eyes reflecting the desperate urgency of the situation. Ilara relied entirely on the intimate knowledge passed down from her father. His journal contained detailed schematics for emergency snow shelters and specific instructions for identifying stable rock formations that could act as natural windbreaks. She recalled his warnings about specific types of snowdrift patterns that indicated impending structural stress. At one point, a crucial culvert designed to channel meltwater began to groan under a sudden massive snowdrift. The prospect of it collapsing and sending tons of ice and debris down the trail was terrifying. Ilara, despite the searing pain in her shoulders and the protest of her lower back, moved 60-pound timbers, each icy and unwieldy, through the blinding snow, bracing the culvert's weak points. Every joint in her body screamed in protest, her breath ragged in her chest, but she continued, her will as unyielding as the granite around her. The success was marginal, a testament to her tenacity rather than an easy victory. The trail held, but it had been pushed to its absolute limits. A crucial section, a meticulously carved ledge, was threatening to collapse under the combined assault of ice and snow. In a desperate whiteout moment, guided by her father's precise calculations for minimal explosive charges to maintain structural integrity, she managed to blast a new, albeit shorter, bypass tunnel through a particularly stubborn rock face. The muffled explosion was barely audible above the storm's roar, but it created a narrow, protected route, saving the main passage from total collapse. It had been perilously close to failing. Meanwhile, Justice Crowley, renowned for his strict adherence to legal schedules, found himself hopelessly stranded. He had been en route to a circuit court hearing in a neighboring town, traversing a traditionally known mountain pass that was now utterly buried and impassable. His party, accustomed to the relative safety of established routes, was facing dire circumstances. They had heard whispers, fragmented and often derisive, about Ilara Vance's improbable trail. With no other options, and facing the very real prospect of freezing to death, Justice Crowley swallowed his considerable pride and dispatched a rider, a desperate messenger who arrived half-frozen at Ilara's remote shelter. The justice himself arrived hours later, his face grim with cold and unconcealed frustration. He did not offer a formal apology for his previous dismissals, but his actions spoke volumes. He offered Ilara a modest sum of $20 in gold coin, a significant amount, to guide him and his party safely through what he reluctantly admitted was the only navigable route left in the entire region. He said that the trail was unconventional, but undeniably effective, his voice stiff with the effort of admission. He further offered his sturdy four-horse carriage for the final leg of their journey back to Prospect's End, an offer that implicitly acknowledged the trail's newfound importance. It was not praise, but a raw, unvarnished recognition of necessity. In the aftermath of the harrowing blizzard, Vance's Passage, once a mere whispered oddity, rapidly established itself as the indispensable artery of the region. The winter, proving itself historically severe, persisted for weeks, keeping all other mountain routes choked with snow and ice. Ilara's routine solidified into a relentless rhythm of maintenance and cautious expansion. Every morning, she would walk the full length of the passage, checking for new rockfalls, reinforcing weakened sections, and clearing drainage channels, her every step an intimate dialogue with the mountain. The quantifiable impact of her labor became undeniable. Within 2 months of the blizzard, Vance's Passage was facilitating the safe and reliable daily passage of 25 laden pack animals, each carrying vital supplies, mail, and even small groups of desperate travelers. This shortened the arduous journey between Prospect's End and the remote northern settlements by at least half a day, sometimes even a full day in severe weather. The immediate impact was felt by at least 10 families who, previously isolated, could now maintain consistent trade and communication, bringing much-needed goods and news to their homesteads. Seeing the success of the initial trail, Ilara began work on a second equally ambitious element, a series of 6 sheltered supply caches strategically placed along the passage. These were not mere lean-tos, but robust, dry stone structures, each insulated with thick layers of packed earth and carefully sealed to protect against the elements, designed to store emergency provisions and goods for extended periods. She meticulously chose locations shielded from avalanches and high winds, using her father's knowledge of microclimates. Then a new crisis gripped the wider community. A virulent outbreak of fever swept through a remote settlement further north, threatening to decimate its small population. The early, persistent winter snows had effectively cut off all traditional routes for medicine and aid, leaving the community isolated and vulnerable. It was Ilara's system, Vance's Passage, that transformed into an emergency lifeline. She quickly converted her planned supply caches into temporary triage points and rest stops for relief teams. She personally guided several relief parties, enduring grueling 14-hour days, ensuring the safe passage of doctors, nurses, and vital medical supplies, including 50 pounds of quinine and 100 pounds of dried food. Her trail was not merely a route, it was now a conduit of survival. Old Man Fitzwilliam, the grizzled prospector who had once openly scoffed at Ilara's efforts, witnessed the sheer scale of the relief effort firsthand. He saw the continuous flow of people and supplies through Vance's Passage, a constant stream against the backdrop of the still snow-choked wilderness. One frigid evening, as Ilara was meticulously repairing a damaged section of a supply cache, reinforcing its stone walls against a particularly biting wind, Old Man Fitzwilliam approached her. His face, etched with decades of hard living, showed a flicker of profound humility. He spoke, his voice uncharacteristically soft, admitting that he had been entirely wrong about the land and about her ability. He said that she had accomplished what no one else had even dared to consider, transforming a useless rock into a vital artery, a testament to perseverance and ingenuity. Ilara, focused on setting a particularly heavy stone into place, merely nodded, acknowledging his words without pausing her work. The quiet strength of her continued labor was her only and most potent reply. 20 years later, the land around Prospect's End had been irrevocably transformed. Ilara Vance, now 46, bore the indelible marks of her decades spent in the wild. Her once dark hair was now threaded with silver, especially around her temples, and deep lines carved by years of sun, wind, and keen observation fanned out from her amber eyes. A persistent ache in her lower back, a ghost of her early labors, would assert itself with particular insistence on cold mornings, a quiet reminder of every rock she had moved, every trail she had forged. Yet her hands, though still heavily calloused and scarred, retained a surprising dexterity, and her posture remained remarkably straight, imbued with the quiet strength of someone deeply rooted in her purpose. Flint, her loyal grey companion, had passed away peacefully of old age 5 years prior, at the venerable age of 15. His simple stone grave lay nestled near the main northern entrance of Vance's Passage, a place where Ilara often paused, running a hand over the rough stone marker. His legacy, however, trotted faithfully by her side in the form of Grit, a young grey pup with the same piercing amber eyes, a direct descendant whose spirit, Ilara often mused, mirrored his predecessor's quiet strength. The community itself was almost unrecognizable. Vance's Passage, her once scoffed-at creation, was now a celebrated landmark, officially marked on territorial maps as a vital artery of commerce and communication. What had been a scattered collection of homesteads now flourished into a thriving small community of 50 families, directly supported by the Passage. A new general store, twice the size of Mr. Henderson's original, stood proudly alongside a bustling blacksmith shop and a sturdy way station that offered shelter to weary travelers. The Passage, once just a trail, had become the backbone of a new way of life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ilara was teaching a group of 7 apprentices, young men and women from the thriving community, the intricate art of identifying stable rock formations through the subtle patterns of water flow. She pointed out how ephemeral stream beds indicated fracture lines and how certain lichen growths confirmed geological stability. Young Thomas, a curious and observant apprentice, then asked about the old stories, the legend of the lone widow who outsmarted the sheriff and built a path through the impossible. Ilara smiled, a rare, gentle expression. She corrected him, explaining that it was not about outsmarting anyone, nor was it about impossible feats of magic. It was, she said, about understanding the land and its demands, about seeing the hidden paths the mountain already offered. Later that week, Justice Crowley, now a frail, elderly man whose own memory was beginning to fail him, visited Vance's Passage. He found Ilara sitting by a roaring fire in the main way station, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. He spoke to her, his voice thin with age, saying that he had seen many things in his long life, much ambition and much failure, but never such a profound transformation born of sheer will and engineering. He admitted, his gaze steady, that he had once considered her foolish, even reckless, but now he recognized her as the truest pioneer the territory had ever known, a builder of more than just roads. Ilara, stirring her mug of strong black tea, responded with the quiet philosophy that had guided her for decades. She replied that the mountains do not hide the way, they simply demand you learn to see it. It was not a triumph, but a simple statement of enduring truth. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, Ilara walked, Grit trotting quietly beside her, to Flint's simple stone grave. The rhythmic hum of activity from Vance's passage echoed softly through the evening air. The distant creak of wagon wheels, the low murmur of voices from the way station, the steady flow of life her work had fostered. Vance's passage was not built by defiance, but by the only thing that respects the wilderness, relentless understanding. This enduring legacy, woven into the very fabric of the landscape, stands as a powerful reminder that true innovation often arises from profound necessity and an unwavering dedication to mastering the seemingly insurmountable. Subscribe to the channel. Join us next time as we explore more untold stories of ingenuity, resilience, and frontier engineering that shape the world we know today.